Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here. You join the Constitution Study live, doing our Q&A every couple of weeks so that everybody has a chance to not only learn a little bit, share a little bit, ask some questions. Let's see what's on people's minds. As usual, I'm going to start out with my own little topic of the day. And I actually think I've got two. They're closely related. One of the things, I've already got somebody commenting. So, but yeah, before I forget, if you are in YouTube Periscope, if you have a question, please post your question in the comments, and I should see them here on my screen, and I will try to answer them during the broadcast. Again, I love getting questions. This is primarily about answering your questions. So if you have questions, be my guest. I don't have anybody in the Zoom room with me today. So usually I have a few people that have signed up. They join. If you want to sign up, if you want to join me on Zoom, well, the nice thing about Zoom is when you ask a question, you can actually talk to me and we can have a conversation, which is a lot easier sometimes than trying to answer chats where I get different, chat messages interleaved and you lose track of what people are talking about. I do it and it's great. But you can join me in the Zoom room. Just head to constitutionstudy.com. You will see the events in the right-hand column on the homepage. Pick one of the live streams, register for it. You will get an email. Generally, I send 2 or 3 leading up to the event with the link to the Zoom so you can actually join me there. But if you're watching on YouTube, you're watching on Periscope, that's fine. Stick a comment, type your question into the comment, and I will answer it as the broadcast goes by. My topic du jour, what I want to start out with today, like I said, there's actually 2, but they're closely related. I heard on one of my news feeds, for those of you who don't know, I get news feeds from a lot of different places and that I parse through for the radio program, for the podcast, for the Q&As. And one of the ones I heard today was the CDC is now recommending the vaccine for children as young as 12. Now, my issue isn't so much about whether or not someone gets a vaccine. To me, that is a personal decision based on your needs, your risks, your medical condition, and that of your children. But I'm finding it disgusting that we're pushing. Well, I'm really upset that we have an experimental vaccine. I was at a doctor's office yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, it's the day before yesterday. And we were talking to a PA, very nice person, and the question came up of, have we gotten the vaccine? And the answer is no. And my response was, well, I have a 99% chance of surviving COVID-19. So no, I'm not taking experimental drug when I've got a 99% chance of survival. And the PA said, 99%? I said, yeah, look at the CDC data. You have a 98% chance, everybody, overall, all age ranges. You take all the deaths, 98% of all COVID cases have not resulted in death. Those are numbers right off the CDC. In fact, the number is only 1.7% of the COVID cases have ended up in death, and that includes those who have died with COVID as opposed to of COVID. So I'm not real worried, and I'm not ready to be a guinea pig. Now, this person, what irked me about that was this is a medical professional. And she is apparently more than happy to simply say, well, Fauci says, get a vaccine. Let's not have any rational, reasonable discussion. I mean, she was polite, but she obviously paid no attention to what I was saying, just blew me off as some, I'm assuming crazy, possibly an anti-vaxxer, who knows? But and that stuff irks me, that the American people now either are unwilling or unable to actually analyze information. We so worship experts that if they tell us the sky is green, we believe it. And I tell you here all the time, man, if the media tells me the sky is blue, I go out to double check. So that was one thing. The other was an article, or I'm sorry, a report I heard, and this is actually a couple weeks ago. In West Virginia, the governor of West Virginia is offering people, I think it was 16 to 35, $100 savings bond if they got the vaccine. That's right. West Virginians, your governor is bribing your young people to take an experimental drug when their odds, when they have some of the best odds of survival of anyone. We have the CDC saying, as young as 2, wear a mask, when there's been no evidence that children that young can catch it, much less transmit it. In fact, I think it's 12 or 13, 0.0 something percent of the kids have gotten cases, and none of them have died from it. And there's no evidence that they transmit it. Yet we're putting face diapers. We're wrapping children's heads in diapers when their risk is as close to zero as you can get in this life. And now we have governors bribing people to take an experimental drug. I'm just, it's what's happened. It's like Americans, it's like we've lost all will to govern ourselves. We just, bow down to whichever expert the government says is in charge now and ignore all the facts to the contrary. It's, was it Brave New World, or was it 1984? It was 1984 where, what the party says is true and newspeak and all that. I'm like, I set a goal for myself. I'm going to be, my Knowing Your Rights tour is going to start. My first scheduled trip is this August. And I've actually got copies of 1984 and Brave New World on audiobook, so I can listen to them while I'm driving, so I can refresh myself with the insanity that was predicted those decades ago that we're living through today. So my pet peeve of the day is not so much the CDC and Fauci and all this stuff. It's the fact that the American people are just so gullibly accepting whatever somebody takes because they claim to be an expert. And we see how bad we're now seeing evidence of how damaging that was in 2020. And we're not learning our lesson. So that's the pet peeve of the day. Okay, Florida Man has a question. How is the Supreme Court able to look at the words of the Fifth Amendment and include the creation of Miranda rights? Is the Supreme Court just making things out of thin air? Is this constitutional? Okay. We've all watched crime dramas, and we've all seen someone taken into custody and they read their Miranda rights. They're called Miranda rights because the wording for the right comes from a case where Miranda was one of the parties. I don't remember the specifics of the case, but let's think of what are the Miranda rights? Well, hang on a second. Let me bring something up because Florida Man makes an interesting point, and I want to get things right here. Okay. I always I like to read my quotes here. So the first right is the Miranda says, you have the right to remain silent. Okay. The Fifth Amendment says that nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. That's the right to remain silent. You don't have to testify before yourself. You don't have to give evidence against yourself. This is not self-incrimination. It doesn't say you have the right. It's often referred to as the right against self-incrimination. It is not. You do not have to be a witness against yourself. Therefore, you have a right to remain silent. If you don't remain silent, well, that can be used against you in a court of law. So far, Miranda is following the language of the Fifth Amendment. All right, so you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say will be taken down and may be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Okay, so we have, where is it here? There we go. The Sixth Amendment says that a witness has the right to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So your right to an attorney is actually the Sixth Amendment. Now, this is what I refer to as a positive right, meaning the government must do something for you. So Miranda says, if you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided for you free of charge. There's a positive claim on government to provide you counsel if you can't afford it. So again, that's constitutional. So again, we have the right to remain silent. We have the right to assistance. Is that all, Miranda? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney if one cannot be provided. If you cannot afford one, won't be provided for you. Am I missing something, Florida man? I'm. It's funny. I watch plenty of crime dramas, but I kind of zone out. So if we look at what are referred to as Miranda rights, which is actually the Miranda rights are the requirement that in arresting a custodial officer, arresting officer, proper term is a custodial officer, informs you of your rights. Now, I find this really a sad state of the American populace because we should know we have these rights without having to be reminded. If we had an education system that taught any sort of civics, that talked at all about what the Constitution actually says, you would know that you have a right not to not to be a witness against yourself, that you have a right to an attorney, and we wouldn't need to be told. But on the other hand, okay, what happens if someone is uninformed? It's important that the government says before we exercise this power of custody, that you be informed of certain rights that are important to you. So the Supreme Court did not make this up out of thin air. Miranda comes from the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution. They are part of what's called the Due Process Amendments. And the fact that the court said, listen, law enforcement, which is usually targeted at, you must inform someone just in case they don't know. So it was a good question, but what we refer to as Miranda rights, which is actually the right to have the government tell you your rights. Actually, the actual rights that they're protecting come from the Fifth and Sixth Amendment to the Constitution. Let's see. Are there not a lot of people out there today? Are there any other questions floating around? It looks like I got a couple people, one on YouTube, one on Periscope. I don't have anybody in the Zoom room. Not quite sure what's going on. It's pretty quiet. Florida man, are you the only person out there talking to me today? I'm guessing that is. So what else is going on? Let me talk to you a little bit about this Knowing Your Rights tour while we see if somebody else joins up and what's going on. So last year, I was asked to put together a placard and a class called Knowing Your Rights. And it was designed to inform people all of the rights that are being infringed upon by mask mandates, by essential business orders, by lockdowns, by shutdowns, all of this nonsense. And I put together this placard and I put together a class, and it was focused on a certain topic. But as I'm desperate to get out and about and meet people. So I put together what I call the Knowing Your Rights tour, and I've kind of modified it. I've updated it to be a little more broad scoped. So it's, I'm still talking about your rights and the importance of your rights and knowing what they are and how do we apply them? How do we defend and assert them? And if you want to find out more, head to constitutionstudy.com/tour, TOUR, and you'll see a bit of description about what I'm trying to do on this tour. You'll see all my locations. I've got one location that I'm adding to it that I haven't put on the site yet, but you'll see all the locations I'm going to be. I'm going to be in Fargo, North Dakota, Kildare, North Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota. I'm going to be in Thermopolis, Wyoming. And what I'm looking for is I'm actually looking for an app or a plugin or something I can put on the website that not only shows my stops, but shows my travel. And I would love it if you live, first of all, if you live anywhere from Nashville, Tennessee to North Dakota, anywhere in that area, Minnesota, I'm looking at Illinois, and maybe Indiana, Nebraska. If you're there and you want me to come speak to a group, go to the website. On that page, right? So you've got the description, you've got the schedule. There's a donate button so you can help fund my travel. By the way, I'm driving all of this. I'm not flying for one simple reason. I don't trust the airlines. They're going to tell me that I need a vaccine to fly, which is ludicrous. I don't trust them, so I'm not going to give them my money. But so if I'm going to be in that, right at the bottom page is a form. You can say, hey, I want Paul to come speak to us. Give me a little information. We'll set up a Zoom call and we'll discuss it. If we can make it happen, we'll make it happen. Hello, Philip, Florida man. I'll get to your other question in just a second. But so that's the plan. Is I'm meeting groups. I'm meeting in a bakery in one city. I've got some very nice person. We've got an all-day event in Fargo on Thursday. I think it's the 12th. It's going to be August. The morning I'm doing a Constitution primer for middle schoolers and high schoolers. Then the afternoon I'm talking about knowing your rights and all of that stuff. And there's going to be Q&A. Wonderful time. If you're anywhere actually it's in Grand Forks, not North Dakota. It's not Fargo. It's actually in Grand Forks. Check it out. We're going to have a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to meeting people. Stay in touch. You can find out more. All right, Florida man has another question. Thoughts on former Justice Stevens saying the Second Amendment should be straight up removed or modified to say only when serving in the militia? Crazy how this can be a Supreme Court justice. Well, so my first thought is you have to understand lawyers and judges do not study the Constitution in law school, right? They do not. I have asked every lawyer I meet, I asked them in law school, did they study the Constitution or constitutional law? One lawyer has told me they studied the Constitution. Everyone else tells me they study constitutional law. What is constitutional law? Constitutional law is the opinion of judges about, well, it's supposed to be the opinion of judges about the Constitution. What it really is the opinion of judges about the opinion of judges about the opinion of judges about the opinion. It's legal telephone game. The Constitution says something, a judge says something about it. Another judge says, well, so-and-so said it meant this, and and it's this constant drift away from the actual language of the Constitution. Now, that said, trust me, I am no fan of Justice Stevens. In fact, I'm no fan of really any of the justices. Kavanaugh so far, Gorsuch has been pretty good. Justice Thomas is pretty good, except when it comes to the law enforcement. He's got blinders when it comes to anything law enforcement. They get all the benefit of the doubt. But Justice Stevens is correct. If they want to do what they want to do, in other words, if he does not believe that people should own guns, the proper way to do it is to rescind the Second Amendment, to pass an amendment that repeals the Second Amendment or modifies it to say only when you're in the militia. But then we have another problem with the militia, and that is most people don't know what the militia is. Simply put, the militia is the armed citizenry. So I look at Justice Stevens and said, you know what Justice Stevens wants, he's right. The way to get what he wants, which is a disarmed populace, is to either repeal or seriously modify the Second Amendment. The reason we have a Second Amendment is what gets lost on most people. If you head to America Out Loud, well, actually, I did. You go ahead to Constitution study, and what did I call it? It was for April. I think it was April 19th. And and I think I didn't call it the shot heard around the world. But I talk about the, sorry, it's called the Battle of Lexington. Duh, Battle of Lexington. Why is the Battle of Lexington so important? Well, it's early in 1770, I think was it late 74, 75. The British confiscated the gunpowder in Charlestown, South Carolina. And people went nuts. And Lord Dartmouth, who was the Secretary of the Americas under King George, strongly suggested to General Gage that they confiscate the weapons of the colonists. They were worried that the colonists might get uppity, or that they were getting uppity. So General Gage dispatched a column of redcoats to Lexington and Concord with two goals: confiscate the powder in the powder house, and if they find them, arrest John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Now, being warned that the British were coming by Paul Revere, Captain John Parker had the Massachusetts militia on Lexington Green when the British showed up. Now, the British commander ordered the militia to lay down their arms and disperse. And Captain Parker's response to his men was, stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have war, let it begin here. And you know what happened next? The shot heard around the world. That's right. The Revolutionary War, the spark that lit the Revolutionary War, was gun control. Because the one thing tyrants are most afraid of is an armed populace, because an armed populace tends not to be subject to the laws of dictators. I've got some pretty good quotes here if I can find them. My quotes have been a little disheveled. What do you got here? Is that what I'm looking for? No, that's not it. That was that. Oh, I like this. One of the ones I love is John Adams says, I must study politics so my sons can study mathematics. But that's not the one I'm looking for. Where is it? The reason we have a Second Amendment is not to protect hunting rights. No one was worried about Bambi taking your guns. What they're worried about is an out-of-control government. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to John Cartwright wrote, the Constitution of most of our states assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves in all cases to which they think themselves competent, as in electing their functionaries, executive and legislative, and deciding by jury of themselves both facts and law in all judiciary cases in which any fact is involved. Or they may act by representatives, freely and equally chosen, that it is their right and duty to be all times armed. It is their right, it is our duty to be at all times armed. Why must we be at all times armed? Well, James Madison said, the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, the existence of subordinate governments to which the people are attached and by which the militia officers are appointed, forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition more insurmountable than any which a simple government of any form can admit of. Notwithstanding the military establishments in the several kingdoms of Europe, which are carried as far as public resources will bear, the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. Do you want to know why gun control is so popular amongst federal supremacists? Government supremacists? They're afraid of people being armed. Why? Well, that's a very interesting question. Noah Webster said, before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom of Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any bands of regular troops that can be, on any pretense, raised in the United States. A military force at the command of Congress can execute no laws but such as the people perceive to be just and constitutional, for they will possess the power and jealously will instantly inspire the inclination to resist the execution of a law which appears to them unjust and oppressive. The last thing Justice Stevens wants, the last thing Joe Biden wants, the last thing most of the most of the central, the Marxists and the socialists, and the ones that believe in an unlimited government, that we serve government, they don't want the people armed. Why? Because we can stand up to unjust laws. I hear people talk about, well, the Second Amendment doesn't matter because they've got the Army, they got the Navy, they got the Air Force, they got the Marines, they've got the guns, they've got the tanks, they got the missiles. Two important things you need to know. During the colonial days, during the Revolutionary War, approximately 1/3 of the colonists wanted independence from Great Britain, 1/3 wanted to stay subject to Great Britain, and 1/3 didn't care. But out of that, only approximately 3% of the colonists actually fought for independence. 3. Now take this fact in mind. I did the research, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, the National Guard, and the reserves. In other words, all of both the regular military and what are referred to as the organized militia by federal law. They're called the organized militia. You put those all together, the U.S. military has about 2 million men and women it can arm. 2 million. It is estimated there are more than 100 million armed people in America, armed citizens, 100 million. So if only 3% of the colonists fought in the war, if only 3% of Americans, armed Americans, are willing to fight for their liberty, that's over 3 million people against an army of 2 million. But Paul, they have better guns. Have we learned nothing from the Revolutionary War, from Iraq, from Afghanistan? You don't need to have superior arms. What you need is a cause to fight for. That's why Noah Webster said, a standing army cannot rule, but the people must be disarmed. We talk about these illegal laws. We talk about unconstitutional laws. And I make the point is any law that violates the Constitution is illegal. And it's actually a federal crime to deprive someone of a right protected by the Constitution. But they get away with it because the American people won't stand up to it. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops that can be, on any pretense, raised in the United States. See, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Franklin said, we must all stand together, or we must all hang together, or we will assuredly hang separately. That's what we should have learned in 2020. When people band together, government backs down. I'm not talking about the riots. I'm talking about men and women in New Jersey who refused to allow their gym to be closed. Barbers and hairdressers. I don't know what it is about cutting hair for a living, but there are several barbers and hairdressers that stood up to government and said, no, we are not shutting down. And when people stood with them, they were okay. But when they stood alone, the Texas mother alone trying to watch her son play a game, in this case, the pastor in Canada when he was away from his church. When we stand alone, we are easy targets. That's why it's important that we stand together, that we protect not only our rights, it's actually more important we protect the rights of others. That we see, when we see someone standing up to tyranny, that we support them however we can. That, to me, that is important. So I have a lot, Justice Stevens, his stance on the Second Amendment is not what I think is so wrong with Justice Stevens. He has that because he has a uneducated understanding of why we have a Second Amendment. He thinks we have a Second Amendment because we're gun nuts, or probably something along that lines. Or he thinks we have it for hunting, rather than realizing that we have it to protect ourselves from an out-of-control government. Now you go on to say, strict scrutiny, immediate scrutiny, for judicial review. I can summarize that in one word. It's hogwash. The idea, now you understand, let me preface it with this. The Supreme Court, and in fact, all the federal courts, are a creation of the Constitution of the United States. They are created, they're given their form, they're given their boundaries, they're given their jurisdictions. They don't get to choose how to review. See, I don't debate strict scrutiny, because the whole idea of strict scrutiny versus intermediate scrutiny is the creator changing the creation. It is an inversion of power. The Supreme Court does not have the legal authority to determine whether or not it's going to apply the Constitution. What do I mean? So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the terms, when a case comes, when your rights are violated, and that case comes to the federal courts, they have this whole myriad of rules that they call scrutiny. How close are they going to scrutinize the government's assertion that it needs to infringe on your rights? That's what scrutiny is. So they look and say, well, some rights, you need strict scrutiny. We need to look the government really needs to show they have a compelling government interest to infringe on your rights. Wrong. That is a lie. The government is legally forbidden from infringing on your rights in the Constitution. There is no such thing as a compelling government interest to infringe on your rights. The very reason we have government, the Declaration of Independence, says we create governments to protect our rights, not to determine when when we can actually exercise them. It is a lie from the pit of hell. So when the court looks at it and says strict scrutiny, even strict scrutiny isn't good enough. When the Constitution says shall not be infringed, that is the only standard. Period. End of story. Mr. Biden, you are colossally wrong. Every amendment of the Constitution is absolute until it is overturned or modified by the people through the states. That is the consent of the governed. The Constitution of the United States and of the several states are the consent of the governed for their government. You violate that, you violate the actual purpose of government. And since I'm on a roll, oh, there you are. I was going to say, where did I put that window? Let's look here, and I will quote, because I always want to double check, make sure I get the quote right. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The only compelling government interest, the primary government, is to protect your rights, not to protect you, not to protect your family, not to provide for you. It is to protect your rights. And the only powers they can justly exercise are the ones we've consented to in the Constitution. And the Declaration goes on, it says, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, whenever the government becomes destructive of securing our rights, of exercising only the powers we've consented to, our founding father said, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. So when the Supreme Court says, well, we're going to use scrutiny, and maybe we'll use strict scrutiny, and maybe we'll use intermediate scrutiny, they are violating, they are destructive of the ends of government. And it is our right. In fact, later it says it is our duty to alter or abolish it. I would much rather alter it, because it still can be done at the ballot box. But the problem we have is everyone focuses on Washington, D.C., while the rest of the country rots. Even good places. There are, the number of people I talk to where, the county, the county people won't do this, or the sheriff won't do that. There's the problem. Unless we start with our counties and our cities, you're falling for the magician's trick. They're getting you to look at Washington, D.C. and forget all the power you have over the county. So, and by the way, for those who believe that the Supreme Court is the end-all, be-all, read some of my articles, watch some of my videos, and see how often I prove that the justices of the Supreme Court need a reading comprehension class. In fact, there's a great one. Oh, here we go. I got a good one for you. Federalist Papers number 78. This is Alexander Hamilton writing. And he says, there is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of a delegated authority, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it was exercised, is void. Now, in this paper, in this essay, Hamilton is talking about the judiciary and their role to help rein in unlawful actions of the legislative and executive branches. He's focusing on the legislature. He says, no legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. To deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than the principal, that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men acting by virtue of powers may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid. If it's true for the legislature, isn't it just as true for the courts? Now, there was was about a year ago, Amy Coney Bryant was added to the court, and I just, a week or two, no, I just did an article and a video on South Bay Pentecostal versus Newsom, where I show that here's this, she's a strict constructionist, she's an originalist, and even she looks at this and said in her own, she said that if you work in a chorus in Hollywood and you're allowed to sing, but you can't sing in church, that's wrong. But if the state tells you can't sing either in Hollywood or the church, that's fine. I'm paraphrasing what she said. Your rights aren't a question of scrutiny or how closely they want to look at it. The very idea is not only anathema to the Constitution, it's anathema to liberty, that a creation of the states can decide for itself which parts of the Constitution it will enforce under which situations. It is disgusting. It is reprehensible. Hey, some of my Zoom mates have joined. Hey guys. I was a little lonely here, but I've been having a lot of fun with the people up on YouTube.
Hey, so I got a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. So lawyers in lawyer school, they study constitutional law, and what that is essentially the Supreme Court deciding what the Constitution means or doesn't mean.
Well, no, it literally is judges quoting other judges. It's what I call the legal game of telephone.
Yeah, and see that's the thing. Why don't the lawyers hold on? Why don't the lawyers view that as relativism with the law? I mean, they're just picking and choosing at that point. Why? How can that be law? Wouldn't that be lawlessness?
Well, it is, but that's what they've been trained. You go to law school to learn. And if you're not taught what the Constitution says, when you're taught that, well, the Constitution says this, but it really means that. So you had the question about Justice Stevens and the Second Amendment earlier. When you're taught in law school that the Second Amendment, even though it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, it really is only supposed to apply to the militia. When you're taught things like, oh, the Bill of Rights only applies to the federal government until the 14th Amendment because the court said so. Right? This is how they're trained. So they've been indoctrinated with these ideas that you venerate the opinion of judges above the actual text of the legislation or text of the Constitution. Why would we be surprised? Because you understand, not only are they being taught this, but they are, as a lawyer, depending on what type of law you practice, right? Sooner or later, you're going to be standing in front of a judge who's going to judge your case based on the case law that he or she was trained with. It is an evil system. So until the people force their representatives to actually enforce the Constitution, Article 3, Section 1 says that the judges of the Supreme and Inferior Court hold their offices during good behavior. Violating your oath of office to support the Constitution is not good behavior. If you have one or two, maybe, but if you have a history of contradicting the laws as it's written or the Constitution, including the Constitution, that is bad behavior. That is grounds for impeachment. When was the last time you heard of a federal judge being impeached for violating their oath of office, for putting their opinion above the language of the Constitution? And everybody, and the only people that can impeach a federal judge are members of the House of Representatives, the people we hire to work for us, to represent us in the federal government, our employees. It's our fault, folks. It's our fault.
I find that interesting how no lawyer has ever independently come to that conclusion. You know, it's relativism. I mean, it's kind of like that, at least.
Well, think of it this way. There's two ways we can look at it. Again, if you've never been exposed to the truth, the lie makes sense. Where is it in Scripture? It says, one side sounds good till you hear the other side. I'm paraphrasing badly. If you've never heard the truth, the lie makes sense. But the other thing is, here's the other part. How many lawyers do you think have absolutely zero interest in becoming a judge one day and making the law, setting precedent for themselves? If they view their job as to establish law, to set precedent that will be, used throughout the country, why would you change the system so that when you got to that position, you couldn't do it? It doesn't attract people. Being a judge, I think it attracts. It doesn't always attract people whose motives are simply to enforce the law as it is written. It is to, in many ways, establish the law. I just wrote an article, come out a week from Monday, talking about a veto of an infrastructure bill that James Madison sent back to Congress. And I talk about how, it's actually hard to sit there and say, you know what, it would be really nice. This might be a good thing but the Constitution doesn't allow it. So even though I may want it, I can't do it because the Constitution doesn't allow it. That character is lacking in our government. And I think part of it is because it is a type of character that isn't trained into our young people. And it's certainly the people who are most likely to think that way are not drawn to those types of positions. Think about it. I've been asked multiple times to run for office. I'm like, I will not run for office. I'll say it again right here. I will not run for office. Now, if they want to draft me, if they want to write my name in and I win an election, I'd consider serving, but I will not go out begging for votes because the system is designed for people who have an agenda. So it doesn't surprise me. It's human nature for judges who have never seen anything different. I was talking back in late November, early December. I was on a conference call with a con law election attorney. This attorney has had 10 years of experience in constitutional law around the Electoral College. And I taught her something. Little old me, I never graduated college. I never went to law school, but I read the Constitution and I taught them something. Now, does that mean I'm some great shakes? No, but it reinforces that idea. You go to law school, you're taught certain things until your mind is opened, until you're exposed to the idea that, you know what, maybe the truth is something else. It in many cases, it takes that epiphany for people to wake up and say, yeah, maybe this is not a good idea. So, okay. Philip asks, can college force students to get vaccinated? That depends. Private schools, yes. Public schools, no. Right? A private school is private property, is a private entity. They can set the condition for someone attending their school. A public school, meaning a school that gets public money, that is funded by public money directly, they're bound by the Constitution. They cannot deny someone control of the property of their body without due process of law. In fact, not only is it unconstitutional, not only is it illegal, it is a federal crime to deny someone, 18 U.S.C. 242, it's a federal crime to deny someone a right protected by the Constitution under color of law. So if a public school says you must be vaccinated, and by the way, this technically goes for any vaccination, they're committing, the person enforcing that is a crime, is committing a crime, and can be sent to jail, can be fined or sent to jail for up to a year. Now, are there situations where certain vaccinations are important? Yeah, I mean, there's certain, I was vaccinated as a child. My daughter got certain vaccines, but not others. But if we look at the law and the Constitution, a public school cannot require a vaccine to attend, which brings up a lot of interesting questions in, where was it? Yonkers, New York, I think. There's a Hasidic Jewish community that they were being ostracized because they would not vaccinate their children. Now, if that's bad enough, now we're talking about COVID, where you're not even talking about a fully tested vaccine. You're talking an experimental vaccine. Remember, the COVID vaccines have all been distributed under an emergency use authorization, meaning they have not completed their FDA trials. This is a discussion I was having earlier about with a physician's assistant. So, okay. I hear more Supreme Court opinions will be out on Monday. Yeah, this is the time. So the court, two things about the courts, right? They hear cases throughout the year. They start in October. They generally finish in June. and they usually save their more controversial opinions and release them in June. I do videos on any of those cases that I think warrant it. In other words, I'm not going to get into each and every case, but the bigger cases, I'm very interested in National Rifle and Pistol Association versus, is it against New York, Cuomo, or de Blasio? I don't remember. I'm interested in that because it gets into a question of May issue. And having lived most of my life in New York, I find that extremely interesting. But yes, I will do as they come out. I generally, what I'll do is I will read the opinion, and if I think there's a really good constitutional nugget in it, I will review that. So that's generally what I do. And in fact, Florida Man, if you go to constitutionstudy.com, you can read. I've got several articles up there with associated videos on previous court cases. Florida Man, yes. So the article and the video will be out on the 24th. I just recorded the video. It's still being edited and uploaded. In 1817, Congress sent a bill to President Madison for what was it? It was build roads, canals, and to upgrade waterways. And they said, well, it'll improve interstate commerce. They said they could do it because it'll improve interstate commerce and it will make it easier and cheaper to provide for the common defense. And Madison looked at us and says, there's nothing in the Constitution that authorizes Congress to do that. You cannot, nothing in the Commerce Clause says the Congress has the ability to build roads or upgrade waterways in order to improve commerce. They're to regulate commerce. And there's nothing in the idea of provide for the common defense that says Congress has the legal authority to build roads or make canals. So I go through that. Like I said, I just wrote it and recorded the video. It's scheduled to be out Monday, the 24th. Philip, you're welcome. That's kind of why we're here, answering questions. Let's see. Tunnel Lord's got another question. The only way for a lawyer to still have that thought process means they never read the Constitution or the Federalist Papers. I wouldn't say never, because I've met plenty of people that can read something and come up with a completely different answer. There's a story I tell all the time. I was having lunch with a group of people, and in the course of the conversation, one guy said that you don't have a right to carry a firearm. To which I said, yes, you do. The Second Amendment says so. He says, no, it doesn't. I say, yes, it does. He says, no, it doesn't. I said, listen, when they talk about the people bearing arms, do you think they're talking about an animal in the woods? He goes, well, I said, fine. I broke out my Constitution. He says, well, there's a comma in there. I says, you're right. There's a comma that separates the militia being necessary for a free state and the right of the people to keep and bear arms. He goes, well, I actually opened it to show it to him, and he refused to look at it. I have discussions all the time. I get about, I actually haven't had one in a while, but there was a stretch where I was getting these things. Some people have this strange idea that in Article 1, Section 8, when it says Congress has the authority, let me get it right, because I want to be accurate. I don't want to missay something and someone say I said something else. Okay. So Congress has a right under Article 1, Section 8, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. There is a whole group of people here that think the law of nations is actually in the Constitution means a book written by Emmerich de Vattel back in the 16th century, 17th century, 1600s. Now, I have these debates all the time. I haven't had one in a while, but I have these debates all the time because the term law of nations was the common term for what we today call international law. Emmerich de Vattel wrote a book on the law of nations that he called the Law of Nations. I even went so far, I had one person extremely frustrating. I said, well, where's your proof that they meant Vattel? Because I do strange things. I searched the journals of the debates in Congress, the Continental Congress, when they were debating the Constitution. You can find them online. I searched them. Yes, Vattel was read. The only time Vattel was ever quoted, it had nothing to do with citizenship. It had to do with, I forget what it was, but it had to do with treaties, I believe, treaties. So he sent me this whole document that's, about this. And I started reading it and I'm like, this doesn't sound right. So I did a search, and sure enough, right in the footnotes of the document, it says, when we refer to the law of nations, we are referring to the term of art for international law. We are not referring to Emery de Vattel's book unless we specifically mention it. He still wouldn't accept it. You can read whatever you want. If your mind isn't open to the possibility that you're wrong, you can read the same thing over and over and over again and not see it. How do I know that? Because I've watched. How many times, personal pet peeve, how many cases have you seen in the federal courts where a state was being sued for violating the First Amendment? Right? Now, if you're a lawyer, if you're a judge, if you're a justice on the court, and you're dealing with a case that claims a violation of the First Amendment, you've probably read it at least once. And the first 5 words of the First Amendment are, Congress shall make no law. Congress shall make no law. States don't have Congress. States have legislatures. Only the national legislature is called Congress. So only the federal government can violate the First Amendment. Oh, well, you've got, what do they call it? Selective incorporation, where the Supreme Court came up with this. They came up with this brilliant idea that the Bill of Rights somehow doesn't apply to the states. It says nothing of the sort in the Constitution, with the exception of the First Amendment. Nothing in the Constitution says the Bill of Rights does not apply to the states. In fact, the Article 5 says any amendment of the Constitution is as much a part of the Constitution as the original 7 articles. And Article 6 says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that the judges in every state are bound to it. But the court came up with this brilliant idea that, well, we will decide when we will incorporate the Bill of Rights against the states. Another lie from the pit of hell. So I've got people who've read the Bill of Rights. I've read the First Amendment dozens, if not hundreds of times, that still claim the states can violate the First Amendment. I have a saying. It takes real education to get that stupid. And that to me is a perfect example. It takes real education to get that stupid. I'm sure they're there. Okay, what else we got here? Did the PA Supreme Court break the law by changing election dates without legislative approval? If yes, does it invalidate the election? Well, Philip, yes and no. Yes, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court violated the law when they changed the manner of choosing electors. All right. Article 2, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state is entitled in Congress. So when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and by the way, I don't remember if Georgia did it. I think Wisconsin did it. Michigan did it. Several states did that. So they committed crimes. They violated the Constitution. Now, does that invalidate the election? Not exactly. So here's how it should have worked. And this is really what, if you look at the website constitutionstudy.com, look for, I think it was in December or January, the Texas case against Pennsylvania in the Supreme Court that was just, it was so badly botched. I mean, I was embarrassed for Ken Paxton because he had a beautiful shot. It was a hanging curveball, low and away. It was an easy swing for an on-base hit, and he just whiffed it because he got focused on the wrong thing. So once Pennsylvania when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court opined that they should change the rules, and the legislature let them, and the executive branch let them. Remember, the people do not elect the president, they elect electors. That means those electors were not properly appointed. So when we get to the 12th Amendment, and we read, the person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be present if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. What that means is that the Pennsylvania votes, the elector votes, should have been discarded. They should have been ignored and not counted because the electors were not properly appointed, because they were appointed in a manner other than determined by the legislature. Now, that also means that the number 270, the magic 270, would have gone down as well. Now, I didn't look. I didn't do the math. But if memory serves, from what I remember, that if you remove the Pennsylvania electors, the Wisconsin electors, and the Michigan electors, if you remove their votes and you retally it, President Trump would have won. He would have won a majority of the electors that were actually appointed, which is why it so bothered me when Trump went, on January 6th, when Trump was pressuring Pence to simply ignore certain votes. Pence didn't have that authority. Now, what's interesting is Congress, there's a federal law to challenge the appointment of electors. It happens in the joint session of Congress. A representative and a senator must sign a document that says we challenge these electors for this reason. It's got to be very specific. They should have said we challenge the appointment of electors from Pennsylvania because they were chosen in a manner, they were appointed in a manner other than the one chosen by the legislature in violation of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. At which case, then the two houses would have split. They would have voted on whether or not to accept it. Most likely, because of the politics of the day, those challenges would not have gone through, because at the time, the House was controlled by Democrats. And Democrats or Republicans, they were not going to let the other side win. If the electors were Democrats, the Republicans wouldn't, the Democrats wouldn't allow a challenge. If the electors were Republicans, the Senate would not allow those to be challenged, because we've got political parties rather than laws, which is why the suit from Ken Paxton was actually so important. See, what he said was, listen, these electors were appointed in a manner other than that chosen from the legislature. And by the way, they were very corrupt in how they did it. The problem is the Attorney General of Texas has absolutely no say in how another state conducts its elections. His only legal play was they violated the compact, that is the Constitution. Therefore, their electors were not legally appointed. Therefore, they should not be counted. period, end of story. But rather than doing that, he said, yeah, they did it wrong, but oh, by the way, and he spent 90% of his argument discussing other problems in the Pennsylvania election. So when the court got it, and oh, by the way, Paxton's, the remedy he was requesting. So remember, he's complaining that the courts have interfered in the election process. And his remedy that he requested from the Supreme Court was that the Supreme Court meddle in the election process. I don't remember if it was Kavanaugh or Gorsuch that actually received the complaint. And they said, one, you're dealing with stuff that has nothing to do with your state. There was one point that they could have, but it got lost in all the noise because he focused on the wrong things. But the court also said, and by the way, you're asking to do something we can't legally tell you to do. That is meddle in the election of another state. So would we have President Trump today if they followed the rules? Probably not, mainly because I doubt the House and Senate would have put the law above their party in either way it went. I'm not solely blaming the Democrats. The Democrats were to blame this time, but as far as I'm concerned, a pox on both their houses. Okay. They justify it by the 14th Amendment, I think. Florida man, I think you're talking about the selective incorporation. That is a wrong fix to a problem that doesn't exist. There is nothing in the Constitution that says the Bill of Rights, with the exception of the First Amendment, there's nothing in the Constitution that says the Bill of Rights doesn't apply to the states. In fact, it specifically says it applies to the states. It supersedes state law. It supersedes state constitution. This, again, is the court reading into the Constitution something that's not there. The 14th Amendment, the part they're referring to, which is Section 1, says no state may includes no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of its citizens of the United States. Okay. But if the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law, how does a state abridge that? They can't. It's again, we have decades of outcome-based opinions from the court. And that's just another example of it. The 14th Amendment, the same way the 14th Amendment does not authorize anchor babies, it does not suddenly magically apply the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, to the states, because the right of a citizen to be free from a citizen in the United States to be free from federal infringement on their religion or their speech or the press or assembly or petition. Each state has its own Bill of Rights, and they protect things like freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press, but they do it slightly differently based on the history of the state. You do realize that there was state churches back in the early days. Virginia had a state church. Connecticut had a state church. That wouldn't work if the Bill of Rights, if the First Amendment applied to the states. But it doesn't, because it applies, its language specifically says Congress. Like I said, I've yet to meet a justice of the Supreme Court does not need a reading comprehension class. Okay, how are we doing here? 10 after. Any more questions coming up? Settle Lord, you got something.
So how much do lawyers study the Constitution? I mean, with all that's going on and how they just are fixated on, constitutional law. I mean, they don't study the Constitution. They don't even read it, do they?
They don't. They don't study it in law school, and the vast majority never study it once they graduate law school, because the system has become so warped that it to the point the Constitution does not matter as much as precedent. Now, that is a fact of the way things work. That's not what the law says. The law says the Constitution matters more, but the people have so allowed the government to corrupt the process. It comes back to the ends justify the means. Oh, well, this is important, so all right, we'll let it go because this is important. Yeah, well, guess what? Now the Constitution is all but used for toilet paper by courts every day. What we got here? Christopher, for the Illinois FOID card, this is not the first time the judge ruled unconstitutional. They were in 2018. The Illinois Supreme Court throw it back to the circuit courts. So yeah, Christopher, Christopher's referring to a post I put. So for those of you who don't know, I have a second site called constitutionscholars.com. It's where people who want to be students, a scholar is a student. So people who want to be students of the Constitution can get together, read, study, share information. And I post news articles in the different state groups. There's a group for every state. I'm assuming Christopher's in Illinois. He's in the Illinois group. And I posted a couple weeks ago an article that an Illinois judge said that the Illinois firearm ID card law is unconstitutional. Well, yeah, it is. Now the question is, what are they going to do about it? Because remember, well, at least in federal courts and probably most of the state courts, I'd have to look at the state constitutions. Judges don't rule. Judges opine. Judges don't make law, not legally. They offer opinions. So the fact that a judge says it's unconstitutional doesn't mean anything unless the legislative and executive branches do something with it. The fact that a judge found it unconstitutional, that's good news. Is it the panacea that's going to fix everything? No. Remember, judges are part of government. They're part of the government. So until we hire better people to enforce the laws in the Constitution, judge's opinion is a good thing when it's the right opinion, but that doesn't fix the problem. If a judge's opinion fixed the problem, we would not be living in a republic. We'd be living in an oligarchy. Come to think of it, we are living in an oligarchy because right now laws don't mean anything unless the judges approve it. Just look at how quickly laws are a law gets passed, a bill gets signed, and they're in court later that day, and an injunction's put out preventing the enforcement of that law until the courts decide. The courts have taken the place of King George, giving their assent to laws. So that's where that sits. Anyone else?
Well, it's not much of a question, but I almost want to challenge my House reps and even my local senator and sort of poke and prod and see if, what they did study in law school. I mean, it is going to be constitutional law, but I just, it'll be interesting to see because I'm going to send them something I've been working on. Yeah.
So back before I got booted from Facebook, I got the most wonderful comment. I cherish this comment like few others. It was a lady who was thanking me for the work that I'd done, the information I put up. Her husband sued some county official. I forget who it was. I've asked for permission to publish this and use it, and I did not hear back from them. So I don't get into details, but the husband had sued some county officials, and he won his case in court, she said, in part because he knew the Constitution. He knew the Constitution of the U.S., the Constitution of his state, and he was able to show it to the judge. That's what when I go to my representatives, when I go to my sheriff, I I challenge what they say with what the Constitution actually says. And that actually tells you a lot about that person, right? So, example I had back when I lived in New York, I had a representative that had a unconstitutional position on a piece of legislation. I pointed it out to him. I pointed out the specifics. I showed him the language. He didn't care. My point was, then you have disqualified yourself from service. It is not only my right to try and find someone else to replace you, it's my duty to try and remove you from office because you have violated your oath. And it's my duty to tell every one of your constituents I can find that you are a liar and a thief. You lied when you swore or affirmed to support the Constitution, and you have stolen the right of the people to representation in their government because you are exercising a power not consented to by the people. And did it go anywhere? No, it was a House rep. It was our rep at the U.S. House. He doesn't care. I'm at most a handful of votes to him. He didn't care. Now, I go to my state rep and I tell them that, you know what, their biggest concern is either I'm going to become a loudmouth and tell everybody what they've actually done, or even worse, they're afraid I'm going to run against them. I'm not interested, but so yeah, my recommendation, and by the way, my recommendation, I don't care who you meet, please meet with your sheriff, meet with county officials, meet with state officials. You can meet with federal officials, but I start, like I said, sheriff, county, state. My best suggestion, go in and ask questions. Don't go in and make statements. Ask questions. If there's a specific piece of legislation, ask them, do you support it or not, and why? And when they give you the why, again, you got to be polite, give them the why, use the Constitution to show them where they're wrong, the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of your state. I have an interesting example here in Tennessee. The Constitution of the state of Tennessee says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but the carrying of firearms can be regulated for public safety. At which point I informed my House rep, my state House rep, you do realize that last sentence is void. It means nothing. But no, because it's superseded by the U.S. Constitution. Constitution, supreme law of the land, any law or constitution of a state, notwithstanding. You do that, one is you're less likely for it to be a simple confrontation and they dig in their heels and they go nowhere. It's the job should not be the job should be to educate them, to show them the errors of their ways, give them the opportunity to change, but informing them that if they refuse to change, you will inform others of their constituents that they've lied on their oath, they've lied in their oath of office, they've stolen your right to representation, they've exercised a power. Frequently, they're trying to exercise a power not delegated to them by the Constitution. They are a liar, a thief, and a fraud. Why are you hiring this guy or this lady? So, how's the Tennessee legislature been? They passed permitless carry, I thought. So, the Tennessee legislature's better than where I lived in New York. Not as good as I would like, but here's the interesting thing. They sort of backed their way into permitless carry. So an interesting quirk of Tennessee law, it is illegal to carry a firearm in public. Yeah, I said it's illegal to carry a firearm in public, but there are exceptions. So what they do is they wrote a law that said it's illegal to carry a firearm in subject, but there's an exception for this and there's an exception for that. So like there's an exception for a firearm in my vehicle because it's my property. There's an exception if I have a concealed carry, and we've actually got two classes of concealed carry permits, and One allows concealed carry only. One allows concealed and open carry. And then they basically said, well, we're going to add an exception that says if you are not otherwise prohibited, and there's a couple of other caveats in there, you can carry. So I like the idea. I mean, constitutional carry, I mean, they say permitless. You're right. This is permitless carry. This is not constitutional carry. Constitutional carry says the Constitution says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So unless you have been via due process denied the right to carry a firearm, you can carry. Period. End of story. If you want a state permit, you can pay for a state permit so that other states will recognize the legal actions of the state of Tennessee. That's fine. But that's not what Tennessee has done. They haven't instituted they've come up with a form of permitless carry. But it's still it's still this weird, it's illegal for you to carry, but now we've created exceptions for it. It's kind of a mess. It's much better than what I dealt with in New York. I will tell you that. It is wonderfully better. When I was back in New York, I actually worked with they call them assemblymen up there, my assemblyman. And she and I were working on a piece of legislation. What was it about? I think it had to do with, it was the state legislature was doing weird things, like they were pushing votes to way in the middle of the night and not giving, that was it. They were not giving legislators enough time to read the legislation before they voted on it. So I came up with an idea that for legislation that said, listen, you've got to give so much time. And I worked with her on it and her staff, and she ended up watering it down and it died anyway, but it was better. Florida man. Well, put it this way. I believe asking someone if they carry a firearm is the equivalent of asking a lady how old she is. It's not done in polite society. That's my personal opinion. It's really nobody's business if and when I carry. I do. But the question really shouldn't be from the standpoint of carry. I look at it this way. The only person that should care if I'm carrying is the criminal or the people or the innocent people that may be saved by my actions. Other than that, it shouldn't matter to anybody. It's one of the weird, I moved from New York, and New York has this very restrictive May issue. New York City is really restrictive, but it's a May issue. I come down here and they say, yeah, you want a permit? Here you go. I mean, I filled out, I requested my carry permit in Tennessee when I got my driver's license. The place where I got the driver's license, I filled out 2 forms. I handed it to them. I did have to take a training course and I did have to get fingerprinted, but it was like 2 weeks and my permit showed up. It actually, in 2 weeks, it got mailed to my house, it got mailed to my place in Tennessee and then forwarded, because I was still living in New York at the time. I hadn't moved. I was still in both places. It got forwarded to my address in New York in like 2 weeks. So they are very open. And my favorite thing, when I first moved here, I was working as a systems engineer, and I'd be at a customer location. There'd be a bunch of us. We'd go out to lunch, and always the question was, well, who's going to drive? Really, they wanted different people to drive to figure out what they were carrying in their cars, because almost everybody I worked with had a gun in the car. In many places, they weren't allowed to carry out in the workplace, but they had their gun in the car. So I was like, so I like that. I've grown up around guns. I don't carry a policeman because they're too hard to carry. But like I said, when it comes to carrying, I really don't care. You want to carry, great. If you don't feel you're qualified to carry, don't. I love teaching people. I love teaching new shooters how to shoot safely. It's one of my favorite things. Friends, family will come over. I had a friend of mine. He brought his daughter. His daughter was interested, and he was a shooter, but he wasn't really comfortable sometimes fathers, daughters. So he brought her over to my place and I taught her how to handle a gun safely. And we went out and shot in the backyard and we had a lot of fun. So I love it. I believe in protecting myself. The other interesting thing in New York is New York has very restrictive knife laws. So not only are you not allowed to, are they restrict carry, but even if you have a folding blade that you can open one-handed, that's illegal. That's considered a switchblade in the state of New York, and it's illegal. It's crazy. Well, it's not exactly a backyard. I have a spot that I want to build a backyard range. It's not really a backyard range, but I've got a spot where I can do a small caliber handgun, where it's safe to do that. But I have a spot. One of my things when I moved down here, one of the things I want to do is I have a nice chunk in the backyard that I want to bring in and build a berm so I can actually have a real range in the backyard. But I'm actually a member of a range not too far from here that's got some very nice setups, including some long range shooting. But yeah, I've grown up around guns. If I had my dithers, I have collections. I have a collection. I got guns I've received from my father, guns that I've bought, guns with some history behind them. No, a Swiss Army knife is not included because you cannot open it one-handed. But if you've got a knife like this, where there's a little nub, so you can open it one-handed, that is illegal in New York State. Because, and you remember, this is an arm. Second Amendment doesn't say the right to keep and bear firearms. It says arms, anything, knives, swords, mace. That gets another
tanks.
Yeah, go ahead, then, Lord.
I said tanks.
Tanks. So my very first Constitution study, a few weeks in, I had a gentleman come for the first time, and we were talking about the Second Amendment, and he said, well, what about nuclear weapons? I go, is it an arm? Yes. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I don't care if you have a nuke, as long as you don't use it to threaten or harm me or my family. You want to be, you want to spend the money? It's not my business. Interesting, Florida man, not my part of Middle Tennessee. So northern Middle Tennessee, especially southern Middle Tennessee, has lots of hills. Where I live, it is flat. It was the weirdest thing when I first moved down here. It is so flat. I kept misjudging. I'd be at a stop sign waiting to turn into traffic, and I kept misjudging how far away vehicles were because I'm not used to seeing them so far away. Where I lived in New York, it was fairly hilly. It was the weirdest thing. I had the hardest time judging distances at first until I got used to it. But that's, like I said, I live in a free state. I'm glad I live in a free state. I'm glad I can exercise for the most part my rights and fight for them when they try to infringe them. And I'm glad I've got a very constitutionally minded sheriff. As I mentioned already, I've got the tour that'll be in August. I'm going up through. Right now, I've got North Dakota and Wyoming on the list. Go to constitutionstudy.com/tour. You'll find the dates. Wyoming isn't up there yet, but it'll be up there shortly. If you want me to visit your location, you can put a request. There's right there on the bottom of the page. You can request I come out to your location. Basically, if you request it, I'll set up a Zoom call. We'll talk about it and see if we can make it happen. There's another tour, if you're interested, called Big Bat USA, BIGBAT USA .org. And they're doing a constitutional sheriff's tour. They're doing, I think they're doing, well, they were originally at 48 states. I think now they're trying to do Alaska and Hawaii as well. So you may want to check that out. Participate if you can. They're looking for counties with constitutional sheriffs. That's where they want to hold the events. So you can find out more up there. Please check out the radio program 5 days a week, 4 p.m. Eastern time. On AmericaOutloud.com and iHeartRadio.com. Check out the apps. Podcasts are available on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, all that's out there. Find all this information. Please share the information. That's the biggest thing, is getting the word out, letting people know, sharing what's going on. And I hope everyone has a great night, and we'll get together in a couple of weeks and find out what other questions and answers we can come up with then. Night, everyone.